Welcome back to Ambivalent Offenders. This is Jamie.
And this is Erin.
We are so excited to be back after our short little break. We know it was a little unexpected, but with the holidays, traveling and all that, we got a little bit behind, but we are back on schedule. No foreseeable holidays.
We still got some travel, so the episodes might be released on a different cadence or on a different day, but we're still going to come back. We're still with you. Don't worry about it.
Yeah. We're going to a football game for our, I don't know if this will win us fans or lose us fans, but University of Michigan football game in a few weeks.
Yep.
2 weeks.
Go blue. Go blue.
So we'll be traveling that weekend, but then we should be back to our normal schedule.
Oh, and do you want to tell the listeners that we have a new podcast name?
Oh, yeah.
We're going to rebrand, guys. We're going to rebrand.
We are going to rebrand when we come back, and you can let us know feedback, how you like this title. Actually, don't let us know.
No.
Our new title is going to be Interesting Subjects, Terrible Voices.
Yeah, we got an Apple review with that as the subject title, and we were like, perfect. That describes us in a nutshell. Did say it was like listening to two women at brunch, which that is the vibes. That's the vibes we're going for.
I mean, it's conversational. Unfortunately, it's usually at 9:00, so no mimosas are usually consumed. Sometimes one alcoholic beverage, but not one too many, as the reviewer said. Although if they want to send us free booze, we just had to call that out because it made us laugh.
It did. Yeah. We're not rebranding the Ambivalent Offenders. We're staying with the name, and we're staying with our terrible voices because we can't do anything about it.
I was about to say, we can try speaking in different accents, but that's going to get bad really quick. Yeah. You've already heard us sing, so we can either sing a whole episode.
Or maybe we rebrand as a musical. It's just a jukebox musical.
So if you want us to sing about interesting, don't tell us.
Don't tell us.
We're not going to be singing about things. So yeah, continue to be Ambivalent Offenders. We'll continue to be just Jamie and Erin and our terrible voices.
So yeah. Anyway, I mean, again, we are glad that you guys are sticking with us despite the terrible voices and a little bit of a wonky schedule here, but we're still trying to get as much content out to you guys as possible.
Yeah, especially, as I had said before, I'm in education, former history teacher now in a different role, but beginning of the school year, always a little crazy. And then, as we said, between travel and things, a little harder, but we are certainly not giving up. We love spending this time with you and choosing these topics. And I know we're going to have an interesting one this week.
Oh yeah, this one's a big one. This one has been on my list to do since we started, and it was a monumental task. And I will say it will be 2 parts because there's just way too much to put in one. But I'm still excited to dive in, especially since it gave me an excuse to read and learn a little bit more about this figure who's not a medieval man. So obviously, my knowledge was slightly limited.
And I think a lot of our episodes end up being 2-parters just because of both the really wanting to make sure we're doing the story justice and giving beyond just what most people hear, which that makes them questionable, right? It's that reputation that is just a short little, okay, this is what people know about. For example, Bonnie and Clyde, right? Or Bonnie, a lot of times her story is told in a little snapshot. 3-parters are rare.
No, this will definitely be 2 parts. And there is a very natural stopping point. Originally, I was going to slam it into one, but now we're going to go with our natural stopping point so that we can do it justice, because I do think that this one is really important to cover.
I'm really excited because I've actually been reading a book about the Challenger, but it does go a lot into well, again, you already know based on the title, but maybe you don't recognize the person's name.
That's why I was going to ask you how familiar you are with him, which is Wernher von Braun, who will be the topic today.
Very little. I was going to say that in the Challenger book, which I'm not that far in, but it goes back and talks about the beginnings of NASA, and it does bring him up, as well as other Nazi wink, wink, hint, hint, people who were part of that. We've been kind of even toying with the idea of putting institutions on trial, like Aaron and I were talking about, like NASA.
Yeah, let us know if you would be interested in that.
Yeah, especially when there's a lot. There's a lot.
Yeah. And I really didn't know about him either until he popped up in one of my favorite shows, For All Mankind, on Apple TV. I know you haven't watched it, Jamie, but you should, especially now that you're in your NASA era.
I know.
NASA era.
I know.
You've been so interested. You would really like it.
Last year it was shipwrecks. Now I'm in my NASA era. A little more on, I guess, leaning less in NASA. Well, yeah, some NASA, but more space disasters.
There is a lot of space disasters in it.
There was 1 week, I think, when we visited Florida, I wanted to be an astronaut. And then I realized the claustrophobic part and learned about the Challenger. And here I am, a former history teacher. Turned podcast host, turned other jobs.
Well, Wernher von Braun, he's a character in the first season. He's in the first couple episodes, and there are a few episodes that do focus on his background.
Oh, really? So he's that prominent of a role.
He is. So my husband, Matt. Hi, Matt. I always got to shout him out. He's a history teacher for those who are just coming in and haven't heard me say that. But as soon as I watched it, I grilled him about it because I didn't think that it was true that somebody who was that involved in the Nazi regime would be leading NASA. That kind of blew my mind. So that story remained in the back of my mind since then. So again, I knew he'd be a perfect one to cover for this.
Yeah. I know you've mentioned him, like when we initially were talking about doing this podcast. I know he was one that was on the top.
And if you look, like, I jotted down some of the titles of some of the articles about him from online. So it's just a few that kind of give you the feel of it. We've got Devil's Bargain, the two faces of a wartime aerospace engineer, history's most controversial figure, and perhaps the most damning, my hero was a Nazi.
Oh. The questionable one, I'm like, fitting with our podcast.
I know.
Well, are we going to argue?
I'll talk about some of the bio because the biographer also gives an amazing quote that I'm going to steal.
Well, you're not stealing it. You're going to credit it.
Yeah. But I was still like, boom, that's our podcast in a nutshell. There was even a Medium article that I read was like, then this was published in 2021, so very recently. It's time to stop celebrating Nazi war criminals such as Wernher von Braun. So you can see his life and legacy is still under debate. I read Michael J. Neufeld's biography on him. It's called Von Braun, Dreamer of Space, Engineer of War. And something to note before we dive into the biography part, Neufeld does admit that Von Braun is actually a difficult subject to cover because, one, a lot of his personal items were lost in 1945 due to the war.
Okay.
So most of what we have comes after.
Conveniently lost?
No, just wartime stuff.
I'm just like, his diary.
Yeah, no. At least not that we can tell that he destroyed it. It's just at that time, so many things in Berlin and Germany were lost.
Okay.
And then a lot of his stuff is post-war. And so there's a lot of papers, but a lot of that's owned by the U.S. Space and Rocket Center. And then also Neufeld says in his introduction that Wernher von Braun's widow, children, and family have been unwilling to be interviewed, even by his most friendly biographers.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Is there, I guess, anything that they allowed to be donated?
I don't think so. There really is not a lot. So a lot of this is stuff that has either been declassified, coming to the public domain at a later time. And then he did talk about some of his wartime things, happenings later in his life, but obviously that's still pretty limited. I think Neufeld does actually, he was able to assemble this, seems pretty remarkable, and it's still a lot of information, but it must have been a grueling task.
Sure. Does he have I guess in a way, a historical slant or historical argument, or is he trying to give, because so many things have been biased in the past, is he trying to, I don't know, everybody out there who loves history or knows history, having an unbiased account is never possible.
Neufeld?
Yeah.
So he actually works in like U.S. space.
Okay.
So he's deeply involved in these sorts of things. I think he's still alive. I'm saying like he's alive, but let me look at it. Please be still alive.
Watch, he died today.
He's a senior curator at the National Air and Space Museum. I think he's still alive. At least it looks like it. It says is, so.
Okay. When was he born?
Don't make me look at all this.
Okay.
But anyway, to go back to him, I said that he gave the reason why von Braun is perfect for the podcast. Here's that quote. Von Braun has often been depicted as a saint or a devil, as a hero of space flight, or as a Nazi war criminal. It's comforting to pigeonhole him as either white or black, because then one does not have to deal with his ambiguity and complexity, or the ambiguity and complexity of the moral and political choices offered to scientists and engineers in the modern era. Boom.
Boom, yeah.
He understood the assignment. He gave us the perfect subject.
Yeah, and that quote I feel like would work really well too for a figure I have on my list.
Yeah, I know.
Fritz Haber, yeah. It becomes so tough when you're in an era with nationalism and science trying to push boundaries of, you can take almost any scientist. You take Oppenheimer, right? And
that's a very good, most recent example. Trying to give a one-line sentence of his legacy or put him in with the sinners and the saints is very difficult. And that will be, we will say the same thing here.
And it's easier to do that than to, have to wrestle with it. And I like that in the quote, that idea of also the choices by our government and by our institutions to be like, is one thing greater? Are we willing to make this compromise, basically, in order to accomplish this? Yeah.
And we'll talk a lot about that, especially I think in the second half. But today we'll limit ourselves to von Braun's early life and the wartime effort, and then we'll go to post-war in part 2. Okay. And just to note before I dive in, according to that book, his last name is pronounced von Braun. I swear I'm not mispronouncing it. I'm terrified after our Carolyn episode with me trying to pronounce some of it. I'm not going to do it.
Don't do it. Don't do it. The trap.
I know, it is a trap. I'm going to do my best with German names and places, but I studied French. Forgive me. Don't leave us a bad review just because I'm dumb.
No, you're not dumb. Just because you can't pronounce German names. Just do them as outrageous as possible, so people can't take them seriously.
Let's just collectively all be okay with the fact that I'm probably going to mispronounce some stuff. And I'm sorry.
Right. But you're not purposefully doing
I'm
it.
not. I'm not.
Okay, hit me with some nighttime Nazi storytelling.
All right.
It's just like my Calm app. Shout out to Calm app. You can sponsor us with our terrible voices. They'll do the terrible voices. Sleep story.
Well, it might put somebody to sleep. It definitely puts my husband to sleep, I think.
Yeah, right. Matt's all over him. Maybe our mother.
Oh, yeah. Definitely mom. Hey, Mom.
Hi, Mom. Mom. Or really bad Chicago. Mom. Sorry, we grew up outside of Chicago. So, Mom.
All right.
Now we're gonna get shit with that. Okay.
Moving on. Now we're gonna dive in. So, Wernher von Braun was born in 1912 in what was then part of the German-Prussian Empire. We've talked about people of all kinds of families. We've covered royal families all the way down to the Dallas slums. Wernher was fortunate to be born with a silver spoon in his hand. The family in which he was born into were Junkers. This was the Prussian aristocratic class.
Oh, okay.
So wealth and privilege would be immense for Wernher. His father, Magnus, was a civil servant, mustachioed, the book points out. Although I'm like, didn't everybody at this time have a mustache? Let's not act like he was a trendsetter.
Well, especially if you're telling me Prussian man during that time period. I'm 100% picturing a mustache.
Yeah, I'm thinking like Bismarck, giant mustache.
It would be more surprising if you told me he did not have a mustache.
I know.
And I'd be like, I don't know what's under that face.
Apparently, Magnus did have a mustache, like every other Prussian man. Mm-hmm. Magnus would go on to hold various civil servant roles in the Weimar Republic, which is the name for the German Republic, up until 1933 when, well, you know.
You know.
You know.
I know. I'm doing the sign of the cross.
You're crossing yourself.
Like, what could have been?
There you go. We've got one song.
That's my own original. Yeah. Now we're going to go into the musical section of Wernher's life.
I'm not singing German names. I mean, it's hard enough to say them. I'm not singing them. I don't think my mouth can move like that. His mother, Emmy, was very intelligent and, according to the book, an orphaned daughter of an estate owner. She's also from that. They're both from that upper echelon of social classes. And his mother was one of those intellectual women at the time with little outlet for it. She spoke half a dozen languages and she loved learning.
Oh, wow. Badass.
Oh, you'll see. She'd be really close to her son. And it is likely her interest in science that started Wernher's curiosity. And cool. I love this. The family nicknamed her Madame Curie, which I think is absolutely adorable.
I do love that.
Yeah.
I don't have any cute nicknames like that.
I know. Isn't that the cutest thing? Yeah. Although apparently later it would be Wernher's father, Magnus, who took sole credit for his son's achievements.
Of course.
Boo.
Yeah.
Is your nickname Curie, Mr. Magnus? And just sit the F down.
The only person I can think who has a equally as cool nickname, but is our mother.
The general. She is the general.
We're not under embargo or of just saying stuff, but if she ever comes on the podcast, we will refer to her as the general.
The general. Can we change her phone to address her as the general? Yeah, like Siri or whatever.
Yeah, we did.
Oh, those were the days. But I do love that. Emmy's the smart, wonderful lady, Madame Curie. And then, of course, the dad's like, no, it was because of me that my son learned everything.
Love the sciences.
I don't know why I'm doing a Southern accent when he's German, but
I don't know. I just picked up on yours, so I just kept going with it.
I should just do English accent because in any period piece, it doesn't matter where it takes place. They're all English accents. As I said, both his parents came from aristocratic, conservative families, blue blood. This is just a guess, but probably a pinch of incest in there. You know, when you're elite, probably related to each other in some way.
I thought blue blood is like salt of the earth.
No, that's a blue collar, I think. A blue blood is an aristocrat.
Okay. I didn't know that. I just learned something.
Yeah. So they were both from very upper class, ruling elite. And Wernher also had an older brother and a younger brother his younger brother would share Wernher's scientific pursuits. So Wernher was the middle child. We love middle children because we are high achievers. Around the time that he was about 10, there's a story in the book that Wernher's mother, Emmy, asked him what he wanted to do with his life. And this little 10-year-old said, I want to help turn the wheel of progress.
Oh, my God.
I was wondering what you would think as a mother of a son.
I mean, I could picture Henry my son is a little math nerd.
I know. When I saw that, I was like, one, this is when I would slowly back away from the kid. But then I did note that, yeah, your kid is a math genius at the age of 6, and he definitely runs circles around Auntie Erin. This weekend, they were grilling him, little Henry, with multiplication problems, and he was definitely answering them much quicker than I was.
I know I can't keep up with him. But I will say he did not formerly work for the Nazi regime. I can confirm.
Yeah. But ask him if he wants to help turn the wheel of progress.
I think if Henry said that, I think it would be the exact reaction I had of, oh my God. I don't know what to do with that.
When we were 10, I think I wanted to be a Spice Girl. So I was not thinking about the wheel of progress at that time. I wanted to be a Spice Girl, and I probably wanted an American Girl doll, which we never got. That was my priorities when I was 10.
Yeah, either Spice Girl, Britney Spears, or I don't know. Like I said, there was that week I wanted to be an astronaut. I don't know how old I was. I was like 10 or 11.
But you never said that you wanted to do it to turn the wheel of progress. You just wanted to do it because it looked cool. Because of space camp.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, how many space camp references?
One.
Ding, ding, ding. We got one.
Okay.
When is Max coming into the story? Are you telling me Wernher built Max?
Jamie, don't spoil anything. Not yet.
Sorry.
So anyway, since we're in Prussia, Germany, in that region, World War I obviously created uncertainty for the family. Magnus was actually made the press secretary with a big pay increase to work for the new chancellor. However, that chancellor lasted only 2 months, and then Magnus was sent off to serve in the army as an administrator.
I mean, you're at least in administrative work, but
he's not doing the actual fighting.
Right.
Later, Magnus would also essentially be tossed out of Prussian civil service just because of all that political upheaval. You're just thinking, you know, especially in a time of war, it's not unlike what we talked about during the episodes on Alexandra. There's a lot of political upheaval. Magnus is then essentially tossed out of his civil service and goes to work in the pub or the private sector.
I couldn't say in the pub. I was like, wow, career change.
No, most definitely not the pub.
But there's that pause. You're like, he went to work in the pub.
No,
that's where my brain went. I mean, maybe that says more about me. It's like a Jackie Daytona situation.
He did, supposedly, he was a hard drinker. Probably wouldn't have minded. But that move into the private sector meant that the whole family moved to Berlin. They had been out in sort of the rural areas. And now you're moving into the hustle and bustle of Berlin. And you have to think of Berlin at this time between the wars. It had 4 million people and was full of art, culture, everything that Wernher's life previously lacked. To live in Berlin between the world wars was to experience the best that cities have to offer.
Oh, for sure. I took a class in college that focused on the Weimar Republic. Well, it focused on filmmakers who left Germany after making films in the Weimar Republic and like came to Hollywood. And I remember seeing clips and pictures and film of the cities at that time.
Culture, music, writers. It was a place to be at that time.
Again, I just keep going back to that, what could have been.
So. And in Berlin, life was sheltered and pampered for Wernher. They had servants, a butler, buku bucks, as grandma would say.
Love it.
Yeah, we're talking extreme privilege. There was no pulling him up by his bootstraps. He had plenty of bootstraps.
All the straps.
There's a lot of straps. They could afford a lot of bootstraps. But I think it is key to think that it was a loving home with loving parents, despite the traditional gender dynamics forced on Emmy. Justice for Emmy. Let's just make this episode about her.
I do want to know more about her. But it sounds like they were besides obviously having hired help because they were rich, it sounds like they were active parents.
Yeah, and especially Emmy teaching Wernher, and since science was her passion, it became his passion. They weren't like some families where the parents were removed. So Wernher, as an adult, he'd be suave, charismatic, cultured, all those things that he must have picked up from his environment and his parents, especially Emmy. Again, obsessed with her.
all the credit to Emmy.
Yeah. And Wernher always seemed to be a kid who wanted to build things. Apparently, he even started to build himself a tree house at the age of 7, which is like frankly adorable and way beyond even my current abilities at 35. So bravo.
Yeah. And then he built Max, or no,
there you
Jinx.
Go.
Or no,
Jinx.
Yeah, Jinx. Max is the kid. Jinx is the kid. No, sorry. Second Space Camp Reverence.
There you go.
He started to build the prototype for Jinx. I like that. I thought Max. It's been a long day.
Max does sound like a good robot name, to be fair.
I've only had 4 hours of sleep, so I feel like Max, mechanical, but I mean, Jinx is not usually a child's name.
It's true.
Even in the 80s.
Yep. Even in the 1980s. So when Wernher was around 13 in 1925, he was given a gift of a telescope. Space would prove to be a curiosity and a love for the young Wernher. From there on out, he'd be completely obsessed with everything space related.
Okay, so his general science love narrowed down at that time.
And of course, who gave him the telescope? It was our girl, Emmy.
I was going to be Hitler or something.
No.
Like, I don't know. I was like, it's a pause. Okay.
Unfortunately, we're not going to get out of this without a Hitler reference.
I know.
But no.
Anytime you pause, I'm like,
I know, you're scared.
Please don't be Hitler. But okay,
no.
It's Emmy. It's Emmy.
Okay. Yeah. Good. And Wernher went off to elite boarding schools, again, mostly with other elite children because of the fees to go. These elite, wealthy Prussians had right-wing leanings, which his parents did. And you can see here that there are very few Jewish or Catholic kids who attended these schools. Later, Wernher would have the reputation for being apolitical, but that's kind of the luxury you have when you come from that kind of background. Just something to keep in mind.
100%. Was his family, or especially him being as science-minded as he was, did he consider himself religious?
No, his family were Lutheran, but it doesn't seem, at least from the book that I read, that he wasn't more religious than like the average person.
More of almost like today, where a lot of people are the idea of WASP.
Nominally, religious. Exactly. And Wernher's growing up and learning in these environments with a lot of people with the same background as he had. So I just want to emphasize that.
He's not mingling with the poor.
And no, he's from the upper class, and he's going to school with people who could afford those schools. Those are his peers, and those are his friends. As a kid, Wernher would experiment with rockets and fireworks and all the dangerous things that you don't want little kids to have. Very safe.
Yep. So he's the reason for all the no children on the fireworks, yeah.
Yeah, it would get him in trouble, obviously, but that didn't stop him. He even started a fire in the woods at one point in his school from a failed experiment. I'm like, oh my God, child.
Did he lose any fingers? Or
no, I mean, that's surprising that it seems like he made it out pretty able-bodied, despite all these. They talk about like just constantly creating his own rockets and things like that.
Yeah. As a former teacher, that does not at all sound true. I had kids who would climb telephone poles to try to jump on the ship.
I'm picturing the teachers in the schools being always like, Wernher.
I know, that's what I mean. I'm going to reference this kid's name because if they're listening to it, that's fine. But And they know who I referenced it in their graduation speech. It'd be like, Otto, stop climbing the telephone pole. Calm down.
Basically.
So
And Otto's a good German name.
There we go. So if it's Wernher, I would be like, this job does not pay enough.
No, I'm sure it does not.
For all these rich kids sending their rockets.
But Wernher actually was kind of a lazy student when it came to subjects that didn't interest him. The book says he developed, this is a quote, a single-mindedness about rocket and spaceflight, a fanaticism that would lead to blindness about the importance of anything else.
Hey, dude, history class matters.
Yeah, well, unfortunately, this is kind of a theme that would follow the rest of his life. Rockets before anything else.
Yeah.
Wernher was beginning to get a reputation, though, for his brilliance at school. Enough where he's the one who would tell teachers when they were wrong and go up to the chalkboard and correct the problem, according to one story.
Also lovable. Teachers love that.
Jamie's like, okay, we could stop this villain. We know you have to get to the Nazi stuff. Just based on his school conduct, villain. Because of his, quote, unusual accomplishments, to quote the book, in March 1930, the Prussian school authority in Hanover actually had to approve his admission to them a year earlier than normal. So he's moving on up because he's smart. He might not be gaining amazing grades in the subjects that he's not interested in, but everybody knows that this is a man to watch. In 1932, at only 20 years old, he'd go to work for the German army, in effect, as they were happy to fund his research into liquid propellant rocketry, which I'm going to say it, guys. I'm an English major. Please don't make me explain rocketry and all this. Yeah. All I know is that this liquid propellant rocketry would go on to become the basis for modern spaceflight. That's all I'm going to say.
I was about to say, you could just say to me, basis for rockets, and I'd be like, yep, okay, yeah.
I already told you guys I don't really know my multiplication tables. You should not expect anything more from me.
Wernher would be correcting the hell out of you.
I know. Luckily, he's dead, so he won't listen to this. Well, he won't listen to it. So yeah, that's 1932. He's 20 years old. He's working for the German army because they're funding his research. Just a year later, in 1933, Adolf Hitler, so first Hitler reference, would become Chancellor of Germany. The winds of change were blowing in for von Braun and for Germany.
We've talked about before, obviously, there's changes of government or upheaval and war and such. Was there a big overhaul in military, like scientists? Because, like, it feels like scientists is kind of more like, you either work for us or...
Yeah, we'll go into that a little bit more in depth. This is pretty early stages, but especially later, if you're gonna be doing science, if you're gonna get the money to do things, it's gonna be through the German military, especially for things like rockets, the things that Wernher is studying. That's where the money is. You're not going to get funding outside of that.
There's not like a public sector for that. Yeah, at least yet. Elon Musk doesn't exist to fund your SpaceX.
Nope, not yet. He's still a couple decades away. I think it's worth pausing for a second to talk about what Wernher was like as a person at this time as he's entering adulthood.
Yeah, how old is he as Hitler's taking power?
So he's 20. Or he was 20 when he started working for the German government or when they were funding his research, and he'd be 21 when Hitler takes power. So he's still very young.
Much younger than I thought, even.
Yeah, that's like in the early 30s. So he's going through his 20s he's only in his early 30s by the time World War II is over. Very young. I say that as a 35-year-old. He's a baby.
Yeah, I guess I was thinking he was solidly in his 30s and 40s.
Mm-hmm. No, he's still really young. Later, he'd get a reputation as like a ladies' man. And so being 6 feet tall, he's blonde, blue-eyed, perfect. Perfect Aryan specimen.
Okay, I roll.
He is considered as attractive as any film stars of the day. people at the plant and at the army facilities would say that he basically looked like a film star.
Does he look like a film star in For All Mankind?
He's older, but yeah, maybe an older. So that's, when he's maybe in his 50s.
Right, post, yeah.
Even in his older age, if you look at pictures when he's older, he has that older Cary Grant look, I would say. At this time, when he's in his 20, 21, his mind is still more on work than pleasure, we should say. He has his eyes for one thing only, rockets.
I know, I was about to say, he doesn't sound like somebody who'd be like, I want to spend all my time on dating.
No, he even writes a short story called Lunetta about, you guessed it, space.
Beautiful.
The man, he knew what he loved. Got to give it up to him.
Yeah, I guess in that way he's a little bit like another Robespierre of like single-minded.
Yeah, he knew what he loved, and to give him credit, that followed him the rest of his life, basically from about like 10, 12, 13 until, from decades. That's a lot.
Oh, to only have a passion like that.
Yes.
As we talk about our history and our Henry, especially the beginnings of but he's just doing it with rockets, which is way lamer than our Henry VIII DVD, Six Wives of Henry.
That was so much cooler.
Did he ever listen to any David Starkey?
He probably would have loved David Starkey, honestly.
For probably problematic reasons.
Yeah. And like I said, while others would debate the politics and upheaval in Germany at the time, we're entering the 1930s in Germany. So I think we all know what that means. Wernher really had no interest in politics or anything, despite his father being a government official.
Is he part of the Nazi Party, his father?
So not officially part of the Nazi Party, but he does become Reich minister in June 1932. So he is back in politics.
Okay.
Wernher and his family, they have a complicated relationship with the Nazi Party. They're not like the most, let's say, gung-ho. They follow along. They are conservatives.
This sounds a little bit like to alienate. Well, probably not, maybe not a lot of our listeners if they haven't figured out like some Trump people who are like, I'm for Trump, but I don't necessarily love everything he does. But
yeah, it is a little bit like that. And we'll talk about it a little bit later too, because Wernher is not actually a fan of Hitler himself. He's more than happy to go along with the ideas and seems at least relatively supportive of the Nazi regime, but Hitler himself, he's
like
man,
Hitler's a dick, but I'll go.
He compares him to like Napoleon. He's just sort of a demagogue kind of thing. He recognizes that, but that doesn't mean that he doesn't get involved in.
Well, I'm sure he's going to use that too. Again, if he's single-minded on rockets, in order to get money for rockets, you're going to have to play the game.
Yep. Exactly. That's what it is interesting, that this is a massive time of change, and instead of being involved in politics or even thinking about it, he's so far out. To quote someone who knew him at this time, did we discuss politics? Hardly. Our minds were always far out in space. So that's where he's at. That's why there's a lot of political events that are happening at this time. But I'm not going to go too deep into that whole. Otherwise, 1, we'll never come out. 2, I'm certainly not an expert. And 3, we have to think, as I just said, that Wernher himself really isolated himself from all that was going on.
He's not even the most cognizant of like, oh, wow, this just happened or this just happened.
He does say later that he really didn't care, was just single-mindedly focused on his work, which I do believe him when he says that, whether that's an excuse or not.
Right. You still have the night of, Night of Broken Glass.
Yeah.
And other events that are going to be targeting.
I think what you need to know for the purposes of this podcast, we're at a point where the Nazis are grabbing power in the face of that weak regime. The current government is weak. The Nazis know it. They're grabbing power. And the biography really summed it up well by saying that von Braun observed the Nazis' rapid demolition of civil rights and democratic institutions with indifference, an indifference that could only have been reinforced by his conservative nationalist upbringing and education.
It really, to him, it
doesn't matter.
Right. You almost kind of want to do that white man privilege of that idea of it doesn't really matter who's in power. I'm going to be a scientist and get my money. Like, I'm not going to be harmed by this.
Yeah. And all around him, there are people who either outright supported the Nazi regime or those who were sympathetic or people like him that you could say are just willing to play along.
Right.
Like I said, while all these political machinations were going on around him, Wernher was focused on his rockets, and he even had time to get his private pilot's license. He also took riding lessons, quaint, with the SS. Not so quaint.
No.
This is also when we start to see him become more of the womanizer that he's known for later. Friends describe him bringing women around for dinner, sometimes 2 at a time.
Oh, man. Wernher, where are your rockets now?
Oh, God. I really want to say something bad. And I would say rockets in his pants.
So, yeah, his rockets are ready to go. Ready for liftoff.
Oh, God. There's so much phallic imagery, though. It's really hard.
Yeah, it is really hard. Just a quick reminder, or I should say a clarification, he's in his early 20s when he's being, like, apolitical, which is also kind of
on brand. Yeah. All that phallic imagery and stuff is going to deflate, if you will, because in September of 1933, he'd also meet Adolf Hitler for the first time when he came to tour Kummersdorf, the facility where von Braun worked. We see a young Wernher in a photo from that day. He's with Hitler. He's kind of in the back, but he's there.
Again.
I don't think I need to say it, but in case I do, I don't love it.
No. Yeah, like, my eyebrows are very raised.
Again, he never had a high opinion of Hitler himself, if that matters. I don't know it does. We're getting into the late 30s, though. Wernher von Braun was managing huge engineering projects, receiving lots of money from the German army. He seemed, again, more than happy to take their money. And von Braun was given party membership to the National Socialist Party, aka the Nazi Party, in 1937.
Okay.
He is working in a military environment, and that does seem to have been important to him continuing to do his work. He did say that it was less about him seeking it out and more that he felt like he was responding to pressure to join the party.
Like it was a box he needed to check in order to work for the military, that people would more question him or his job was more at risk if he wasn't. I'm not saying I agree with that. Just to be clear.
That is what he's saying. And again, we're taking his word for it. That's what he's saying about it. So you have to weigh that. The closing out of the 1930s before the war, von Braun was really living it up. He was enjoying that bachelor lifestyle, going out on the town, dating around.
Well, he's in his early 20s, yeah.
And his mother's family actually had estates nearby where he was living. So he'd go sail with his Uncle Alec, or go hunting with them. Wernher became really close to this side of his family, his maternal family, around this time. Plus, there was his work. He loved his work. And the Army Research Facility / Center test facility was, to quote Neufeld, not specifically built for him. It was the Army's commitment to the ballistic missile as a revolutionary new weapon that was fundamental. The place scarcely could have existed without him. So we've got big man on campus energy.
Oh, I bet.
And he's not only brilliant, but he's charismatic, handsome, suave, a great dresser. But he's also not above a dirty joke. All things that would follow him in his career. He was just a natural leader. The book also says he was the sex symbol of the facility. Yeah, the ladies loved him. They were like, "Ooh, it's Wernher."
I mean, for a rocket facility, I don't know how much of a compliment that is. I don't know how many other what your competition is, but
Jamie, you're gonna get us canceled by the people who are making rockets and listening to this podcast.
I apologize. You can send me pictures of
yourself, and we will judge them.
Yeah, exactly. I'll be like, okay, I'm
Fair
wrong.
point.
I'm more than willing to admit when I'm wrong.
I can send you some of him younger.
Yes, then send me. I want to see this young, strapping man.
These are the years. He starts work in 1933, and so we're slowly working our way towards the war. So this is throughout his 20s.
Yeah. And just to clarify for people who don't know when the war starts, 1939, right?
Yeah, 1939. I just sent you some. He's got he was like, for the time.
He's kind of got a fat face.
Jamie. Ouch. When he's older, he looks like an old Cary Grant. I think he looks better when he's older.
I was about to say, actually, I feel like he almost has too much baby fat in his cheeks.
Yeah.
Please post pictures.
For the time, I think.
Yeah. No, I can see why for the time, but he just has a little bit more baby fat.
I'm just telling you. I'm just giving you the facts.
The second photo, I can see more of that. For a rocket scientist, not to stereotype, but for somebody who loved rockets as much as he did, like, it looks like a well taken care of man.
He dressed well. He'd always dress well, and he just had that natural charisma, natural leader. That's who he was, and that would, again, follow him throughout his career. He was a smart man. He was brilliant in what he did and what he was able to build, but Neufeld does talk about a lot of times his brilliance came down to him being a great leader, organizational master. So it wasn't just that he knew how to build things.
That's pretty remarkable, just because a lot of times
it's either or.
Right. It's either you have the leadership skills, but you don't necessarily know the content, but you're helping support, or again, the content, but you're not interested in leadership.
That's why he goes on to have such great success, and why he basically takes over these facilities, even in some cases where he's not actually in charge. It's basically his plant. It's his facility. So now we're going to get into World War II. Again, not going to be able to cover everything, but I'm hoping to address the main points as it pertains to von Braun. And I'm not going to make it a play-by-play of World War II because we don't have time for that. And again, von Braun was not on the front or in any battle, so that's outside the scope of our story. You've got the History Channel for that. You can go watch that. You don't have to listen to me try to describe World War II battles.
Yeah, no. That's a lot.
And this is really the crux of the case against Wernher, right? In terms of judging him, this is the big one. Anytime you're involved with Nazis, that's going to impact your reputation. And the fact is, he did work for Nazi Germany. That cannot be disputed. What is disputed, however, we can break this down into actually the title of one of Neufeld's articles for the Smithsonian Magazine. The title was, "How much did Wernher von Braun know, and when did he know it?" So that's kind of the dispute, and that's what we're going to talk about. And I'm going to rely a lot on Neufeld's article and his book here for that information.
I'm curious how accurate we can. Obviously, he's done a ton of research. I'm just curious, with the lack of interviews and things like that, like, can we be fairly confident about?
Yeah, there are, from people who knew him at the time or were around, people who were in similar positions, from bystanders. A lot of this information didn't come out into the public domain until the 1980s, which is why it wasn't until then that there's kind of sudden, I want to say shock, but a little bit of a shock that this man
so a lot
was
of people
involved.
didn't even know until the 80s.
They knew that he was in Germany at the time, but I don't think that people knew quite the details, which is important. If you think anybody in Germany, of course, you're going to be somewhat involved. You're going to belong to the party, but you're not maybe doing much, that kind of thing.
Right. Or you're just, again, working in Nazi Germany, but then you're fleeing because of what they're doing.
And I think there was, again, I'm certainly not an expert on this, but at least from what the book says, it seems like that there was a lack of information, and then it started coming out. And he did talk about it himself, too. We do have some recollections and information of Wernher von Braun himself, so it's not like he didn't talk about it.
This is after the fact, I'm guessing.
Oh, yeah, this is decades later.
Maybe you don't know. Was there any attempt by him to leave Germany to work for another? Okay.
No.
Okay. No. Okay.
Let's just dive in. We already talked about von Braun saying himself that he was apolitical, although he had given in and joined the National Socialist Party, aka the Nazi Party. But make no mistake, Neufeld presents von Braun as being fine with the Third Reich up until very late in the war. This is to quote him. It was only in the last year or two of the war, through a combination of his last encounter with Hitler, witnessing camp labor, and above all, his own arrest by the Gestapo, that he became disillusioned about this regime that he was working for. We will, don't worry, I know we mentioned an arrest, so we'll talk about that later.
I was like, yeah, that would disillusion me too. I don't know why it took you that long, but
yeah, don't worry. Just based on that, it does make him seem focused just on himself, like a selfishness that can't be denied, that he was more than happy to work for the Nazis if it allowed him to work with his beloved rockets. I don't think that shows a very courageous or humane individual in the face of ultimate evil. And as Neufeld also points out, he didn't just work, but, and this is another quote, he continued to work day and night energetically for that program with total commitment. He was not half-assing it.
Right.
And from that, he truly does not seem to have any moral issues with working for Hitler, Himmler, joining the SS. So he does join the SS and all that entailed. We can even see him wearing the swastika pin in some pictures. For all the talk of him being apolitical, Wernher von Braun certainly does seem to have been loyal to the regime that was pouring money into the research he loved.
That definitely sounds, again, he can say in his brain, it's apolitical. Yeah, I was wearing the pin, but I didn't really believe it. He's going through a lot of steps to show he's okay with the regime.
And what about that fundamental part of the Nazi regime, that hatred for Jewish people? While there's no evidence of anti-Semitism on von Braun's part, we also don't exactly see examples of him disagreeing with it. Apparently, in his youth, Jewish classmates of his older brother were welcomed in the von Braun household. But that was much earlier. You're talking late 19-teens, 1920s. He never really had any Jewish friends. Later on, when asked about it, von Braun basically underestimated the anti-Semitism of the Nazi regime, saying it was just scapegoating, which it was, but obviously the hatred had a much, much darker undercurrent.
Yeah.
I really liked in the book, they quote Ian Kershaw, who's a historian, who says, quote, "The road to Auschwitz was built by hate, but was paved with indifference." And I think that's really tying in Werner's role in all this. Now, let's talk about what he was up to during the war.
Can I say, for just a quick reference, it kind of reminds me of the film, the newer one with the sound design.
The zone of interest.
Yeah, I was just going to make a quick reference that it reminds me in that way because the sound design, I'm not spoiling anything for anybody who's going to watch it. It's really good, but the sound design is like kind of the focus of the movie just because the family is the commandant of Auschwitz. His family is able to see their gardens, you see their life, and you don't see in the camps. You just see the walls and you see the chimneys and the towers, and you actually in the background in the entire film you hear screaming, shots being fired, things like that. But even as a movie viewer, like, learn to tune that out and basically become, I don't want to say apathetic to it, but
desensitized.
Right, you're like, it doesn't even hit you anymore. Like, you're not even hearing it.
I think that's a good point, and you should keep that in the back of your mind, because I think that is, I don't want to say it's not an exact parallel, but it is similar. And we'll talk about even during the war and this lead up, he's got a life. He's doing things even outside of building the rockets. And so like that there's this contrast between both what's going on in the front, what's going on in camps, and what Wernher and people of his ilk, people of his background are able to do during the war.
Right. Still living their lives.
Let's talk about what he was up to during the war. Again, this is important because he's not just some lone soldier on the front. He's much more important than that. When the war started in 1939, von Braun's research facility turned its focus naturally to military weapons. He became a member of the SS, as I already stated, and sometimes would wear the SS uniform to work. Casual Fridays.
No. Don't love that.
Yeah. Von Braun had been diligently working on the A4 missile, even presenting the ideas to Hitler himself. Hitler, of course, was stoked, very excited, which is never a good sentence. Anytime you say Hitler's excited, that's never good.
About what you're doing.
Yeah, and Hitler naturally wanted hundreds of thousands of them, which was unreasonable in a way that Hitler was. But the number was changed to trying to do 5,000 for the initial output of the missiles. So these terrifying A4 missiles would later be known as the V2 ones. So these are the weapons of war. They're the ones that are bombing London during the Blitz and other cities. They're the first long-range missile.
Okay.
And they would be the first objects in space in 1944. Obviously, a lot of people are working on these, but he is the creator of the V2 missile. And did he feel bad for his role in creating killing machines? Well, not so much. He really did. He both sides it. He both sides the man. This is a quote from him. Again, much later.
Like he starts doing where you're like, yes, and no,
come back.
Nope.
Yeah. And again, this is a quote from him. It's much later. So you have to take that, to take it with a grain of salt. The quote is, "I have a deep and sincere regret for the victims of the V2 rockets." But there were victims. No. But there were victims on both sides. A war is a war. And when my country is at war, my duty is to help win that war. Well, we were with you in the first half.
Not even the first half. It was like the first few words.
Sentence, which I understand. Like, I'm with him in terms of, obviously, German civilians. And all that. I'm sympathetic in terms of civilian deaths, but also, this is also coming much later. So I don't love, like, if that's supposed to be him regretting or feeling bad for it, not so much.
Yeah, it's not really a sentiment of regret. It's like, this was a really horrible thing I had to live through. It's almost...
It's defensive.
Yeah.
We obviously don't have an idea of the real toll, the number of people who died due to the missiles, but it's estimated that it was around 9,000 civilians. I'm sure the number's much higher.
Yeah.
And you might ask, who was building these missiles, especially when the demand was so high? Obviously, labor shortages were horrible in Germany at the time. People who would normally be doing that labor were
out
normally
on the front.
Yep.
Sorry, I'm going to make a bad joke. It's Jinx.
No,
Space Cam. No, okay.
We would.
Sorry, third Space Cam reference.
It's
but
the
I know who it is. I know. Yeah.
So you know. So
I know.
Say it.
Camp people
You have
from
to
the
say
camps.
It's concentration camp labor.
Yeah.
Much later, again in the 1960s, 70s, when von Braun would be talking about this because he would be asked about it, and I think he had to testify in
Nuremberg.
It wasn't Nuremberg, but it was trials. He would insist, this is again a quote from him, "I never knew what was happening in the concentration camps, but I suspected it, and in my position, I could have found out. I didn't, and I despise myself for it." But did he see the conditions himself, you might ask? Yes, he did.
Yeah, I was about to say.
We know he did. So I'm calling bullshit on it.
If you spend any time there or see any of the camp.
I'll tell you, because we do know, Neufeld, and in the book, he says that first I'll say that, he might have said that decades later, that he never saw what was happening. But again, pretty clear it's bullshit. After an air raid, the plant that was building these missiles was moved underground. And it was as dank and dark as that sounds. And von Braun had been in that underground plant at minimum 12 times, according to the book. He was walking through the areas that housed these prisoners with unspeakable conditions. Prisoners slept on hay or rock, and there were thousands of them in there. Lice, fleas all over, no drinking water. Everything was cold and damp. Obviously, disease was endemic, including lung problems from all the dust. So the book says that more than 20 prisoners a day were dying. Likely thousands died working on these missiles alone. So you have to add that to the count when you're thinking of the civilians who were victims of the missiles.
Right.
Von Braun did speak about the conditions later, but not at the time.
Okay.
And he says, again, that he was never in the above ground camp and that he was not involved in any killings, beatings, hangings. Okay. Of course, I know people say, like, what could he have done? Could he have done something in his position? Unlikely, but it seems pretty obvious that he did not try. And even as part of his management position, he decided to employ more prisoners in slave labor. He wanted skilled prisoners to be sent to the underground plant, which it seems that some were.
Like you said, I don't know what he could do, but it seems clear that in my mind,
seems like such an easy cop out, and
it's an easy out. I'd picture him walking through and just like not
blinders.
Yeah, it's like, here's my rockets. I don't care how they're being built. I don't care about the humanity or the people who are building them. It's as long as they're getting built.
It's hard for me to believe. He says later that he, again, didn't see any hangings or personally witnessed any deaths, but he's very smart. He had to have known what was going on. And we'll obviously go into more depth and break this down once we get to the judgment part. At least from the evidence, you can make excuses, but he was in there at least 12 times, maybe a little bit more.
Yeah, you don't go in there 12 times and not have an inkling of what's going on.
I can't imagine that they were hiding.
Right. I can't imagine guards being like, nothing's happening here.
When he's underground, that we know that place was filthy, disgusting. The conditions were awful. That whoever he was seeing there would have been in really bad shape.
Yeah.
Well, he was busy, as always, with work. He did have time for personal relationships, too. Like I said, it wasn't just all work.
Lovely.
In March 1943, he actually asked permission from his office to marry. His fiancée was 26-year-old Dorothy, a teacher. And why did he have to ask permission from the office? Well, The SS required paperwork to ensure that the bride and groom had the necessary racial and hereditary purity.
Mm-hmm. I had a thought it had to do with that.
You had to fill out extensive genealogical charts, which we know von Braun's parents, Magnus and Emmy, filled out. I wish I could tell you more about this, but the book says that there's not a lot of information about this relationship or even his fiance, thanks to, again, lack of further paperwork.
Is she going to become his wife?
No, so it seems like it was a broken engagement. We don't really know because there was some paperwork, but then kind of just abruptly stops. They never actually got married, and von Braun and his friends didn't really speak of it afterwards.
Yeah.
And it's really, again, only in the 1980s that we knew about this engagement once his SS records entered the public domain. A former secretary hinted that the engagement ended thanks to Wernher's mama, Emmy. We don't really know. I don't know. Maybe she was like classic boy mom. Nobody can take my boy from me. I don't know.
Yeah.
But we do know that they were close. So obviously, if she didn't approve or something, that you could see him not going ahead. And again, no marriage. So von Braun was back to his bachelor ways. Don't feel so sorry for him. Poor man having to sleep with women to help him getting over his broken engagement.
Oh, so sad.
Yeah. And the last year of the war, this is where things really do, I don't want to say turn, because he does continue to work for the Nazi regimes, but it has its own challenges and troubles, even for someone who had been as loyal as von Braun had. So one night, on one of his nights out in early March of 1944, von Braun must have said something he should not have, which relatable, you know. He was drinking, have a few cocktails. He might say something.
Yeah, he has not said something regrettable.
Well, on March 22nd, 1944, in the early morning, around 2 or 3, the Gestapo agents came to arrest von Braun.
Okay, that has not happened to me.
And it was the day before his 32nd birthday. And he was imprisoned for 10 days with 3 others before being released. There was no torture or anything used on him, so he was lucky in a way that many were not. Eventually, higher-ups in the program were able to get von Braun released. I mean, he was needed. He was indispensable. Who knows if he was ever truly in danger, but this scare did sort of bring about that turning point in his relationship with the Nazi regime.
Was the comment most likely directed at the Nazis?
The comment, yeah. I don't think at least it didn't give detail on what he said.
But it was a political comment.
Yeah, at this point, it's towards the end of the war, 1944. Things aren't going so hot, and there is an atmosphere of paranoia. So it might not have been anything crazy.
Could have been just even negativity towards.
Exactly. This sort of is a point where his relationship with the Nazi regime is a little bit more strained. Neufeld says that, it's another quote, von Braun had sleepwalked into a Faustian bargain with the Nazis, who promised him all the money and power he wanted to build rockets, as long as they did it their way, for their purposes. He belatedly realized he was trapped, but he was still imbued with Nazi ideas and was loyal to the army and his superiors. So I think that's important. It's not like he woke up one day and he stopped believing in Nazi ideology or suddenly had a change of conscience.
Right, or was trying to suddenly get out of Germany.
I think this is the hardest part to square away because, again, it didn't even impact his work ethic. He continued to work hard, developing, refining rocket technology, and then overseeing a lot of that production. That never slowed down. And it seems fundamentally selfish that it's when you're arrested that you start second-guessing things. Now, when we know he's been in that plant, we know he's seen some stuff. I'm sure he certainly heard some things, even if you could debate how much he knew what was going on outside his little sphere.
I'm sure a lot of willful ignorance of, like, I think I pretty much know, or I know, but easier to not think about it, but suddenly now it affects me. So,
like that imagery that Neufeld uses, the sleepwalked into a Faustian bargain. I think that's chef's kiss, beautiful. That kind of sums it up right there. In January of 1945, things were dire in Germany. They knew the Red Army, Russia's army, was on its way. They were bulldozing their way through the front in Poland. And instead of waiting around for the end, von Braun and his fellow employees met in a farmhouse to take control of their own fate. Just talking about this next steps amounted to treason, but they went ahead. According to von Braun himself, who knows if this is what he actually says, but of course this is what he says he said. Germany has lost the war, but let us not forget that it was our team that first successfully reached outer space. We have never stopped believing in interplanetary travel. Each of the conquering powers will want our knowledge. The question we must answer is, to what country shall we entrust our heritage? They agreed it would be America, that they would surrender to the American army. So it's a very pragmatic way to go about it, but very clear where his priorities were, space and himself.
Right. Where am I going to be able to still work and get money to build stuff? This wasn't the first time the war looked dire. If he really wanted to try to escape or to try to work for the United States.
When the Gestapo arrested him, part of the evidence they used was he still had that pilot's license, and they were scared that he was going to take off and go somewhere. He clearly was not. He did not. And at least from what we could tell, that wasn't on his mind. That was not even a thought.
No.
With this decision, Wernher von Braun and the others headed south to surrender to the Americans. It was a frenzy as von Braun tried to pack up, get himself ready to go. He also went to see his parents, as well as his mother's family, who he was really close to, wanted to make sure they were going to be okay. There are many questionable moral judgments on him, but he loved his family. And he waited out the end of the war essentially in a ski hotel high on the German-Austrian border. Von Braun later described it in another quote from him. There I was living royally in a ski hotel on a mountain plateau, the French below us to the west and the Americans to the south. The momentous events were being broadcast over the radio. Hitler was dead, and the hotel service was excellent. Neufeld rightfully points out, quote from Neufeld from the biography, not the first time in his life, Wernher von Braun found himself lucky and privileged while concentration camp prisoners expired by the thousands in death marches, in camp evacuations, or died of disease and malnutrition even after liberation. He partook of the hotel's gourmet kitchen and wine cellar.
I was about to say, I'm like, how nice it would be to just be able to hole up in a ski lodge.
Well, on June 20th, 1945, von Braun and other scientists and engineers were approved to transfer to the United States. This transfer of German scientists to the U.S. would be called Project Paperclip, sometimes also called Operation Paperclip. As you can imagine, it's quite controversial. I think we'll talk a little bit more about it as we enter our second episode.
Does Operation Paperclip have anything to do with the Microsoft Word Paperclip?
No, but possibly. Ask Paperclip. That would be clever, wouldn't it? I don't think so.
Yes, that came about.
Well, Wernher probably invented it.
Probably. And drinks.
Well, we've reached the end of World War II. We'll talk about Operation or Project Paperclip. You can see it called both. We'll talk about that and his life in the United States and, of course, NASA in part 2.
Interesting. I'll be curious to see how they, obviously, I have with him working for NASA, they're going to be welcoming him in. I'm just curious those first few years and that initial decision.
Well, and he's certainly not the only one. It's like, it's thousands. And not just NASA, all parts of the U.S. government, just they were allowed to work for the United States government because of the Cold War, the tension that became first. So instead of punishing those who were involved in camp labor,
Right.
Or in the Nazi regime as a whole, people like Wernher were allowed to work.
Yeah, you have knowledge about this.
Mm.
Welcome home. I'll be really curious for that next part. Thanks, Erin. Like I said, I didn't know any of that background piece, and it'll be interesting to contrast that with what's coming next. As we make our judgment. My brain's swirling around
I know.
right now.
As I got towards the end, even talking about the ski hotel, I don't know if you can tell, but I was getting a little worked up about that. None of this is easy to talk about. Obviously, if you want even more detail, I highly recommend the book that I talked about on the top, which can we link it or whatever? Neufeld's biography on him called Von Braun, Dreamer of Space, Engineer of War. I tried to go through the main points, but you can get a lot more information and a lot more information about the science, which I will never understand no matter how. I could read like 5 more books about it and this brain would not understand it. It just reminds me of in college when I took a honors astronomy class, and as we got towards the end with Einstein and stuff, I literally titled the notes, "Stuff You Will Never Understand."
Yeah, it makes me think of, like I said, reading my Challenger, where I'm like, yes, it's the O-rings. Now, what all of that means. The O-rings in the cold.
Those O-rings. I definitely know what they are. Well, I kind of know what they are because I, too, like space disasters. But my English major did not tell me what the O-rings are. It's all just my morbid curiosity.
Anyway, thank you, Erin. Thank you again, listeners, for listening to our rebranded podcast. Interesting subjects.
Terrible voices.
Just kidding. Ambivalent offenders. We really appreciate, I should say, not necessarily appreciate that review, but it would be lovely to counter that review. So
if you do love us and or love our voices, then write a review. We'd love to hear it.
Sounds like a hostage situation. If you really love us,
if you did, you would write us a review.
Yeah. Even if something as simple as interesting subjects, beautiful voices. There we go.
Or okay voice. I mean, I don't love my voice, so you don't even have to say beautiful. Just say moderately listenable voice.
Normal voices. Slightly less than normal. I don't know. You can figure it out. But we appreciate you all. Hopefully you'll be able, again, to stay tuned for part 2 that will come out soon. Watch the Instagram as always, because that's your best place.
It's always the place to go to see when the new episodes are released.
And then our plan is to go back to our regular schedule, which is when we release on Sunday nights or Monday mornings. If you want more content, our Patreon, you can go visit that. The link's below. Or you can support us with Buy Me a Coffee. Coffee maybe will make the voice sound more smooth, or
it can't hurt.
Right. So maybe you want to support us that way. Or, as I said earlier, you can support us with a rating or review. Well, thank you, Erin. I think I've already said that like 3 times. Thank you, Space Camp. Thank you, Jinx. That'll be our last.
I currently don't think Wernher von Braun, at least at the moment.
No, he's definitely not giving the thanks. So stay tuned for part 2. We will see you, and we will do some major judging, I'm sure, then.
I can't wait.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.